The girl was supposed to be safe. The whispers had been subtle at first. Rumors carried across the galaxy, growing louder with each passing day. The humans had something special, something untouchable. But no one knew exactly what it was. All they knew was that the girl, unremarkable to the untrained eye, carried with her a legacy that could shatter the balance of power across the stars. And now, the slavers had come to claim her. The sleek, silver ship hovered silently in the midnight sky, blending seamlessly with the stars. Its exterior was a blur of shifting shapes, cloaking it perfectly from the world below. The alien slavers knew how to strike when no one was looking. The girl, alone in her bedroom, didn't see it coming. Not even when the ground trembled beneath her feet as the ship descended. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. She had just finished her homework, the soft hum of the old desk lamp the only sound in the room. The faint scent of vanilla candles filled the air as she scrolled absent-mindedly through her tablet, unaware of the fate creeping up on her. A sudden, piercing whine split the silence, and the entire room was flooded with blinding light. She barely had time to react. The world around her shifted, a dark shadow filling the room, and before she could scream, two strong hands closed around her arms, dragging her from her chair. In seconds, her world turned upside down. The girl fought back instinctively, her small fists flailing, but the alien's grip was like iron. Her body slammed against the cold floor of the ship, her breath knocked out of her. Panic surged through her as she struggled to regain control, but the figures above her were already strapping her down, their alien faces hidden beneath dark helmets. No words were spoken. They didn't need to. She was their prize. "You know what to do," a voice barked from behind the helmet of one of the slavers. The tone was sharp, clipped, filled with authority and fear. The girl's heart raced as she was lifted from the floor, disoriented and afraid. She didn't know where they were taking her, but she did know one thing. She was no longer in her bedroom. She was in the clutches of something much worse. She barely had a moment to glance at her surroundings. The sterile walls of the ship seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and the air smelled faintly of metal and something organic. It felt like a predator's lair, cold and indifferent. She wasn't the first human they had taken, nor would she be the last. But something about her made the slavers uneasy, something that even they didn't fully understand. A low hum reverberated through the ship as it ascended, the surface of Earth shrinking rapidly below them. The girl's stomach lurched. She fought the urge to scream, knowing it would be pointless. Her mind raced, searching for any way out. She had to think. "Who are you?" she managed to choke out, though her voice was barely a whisper. The slavers exchanged uncertain glances, though they didn't answer. Their eyes, if you could even call them that, were hidden behind dark visors, leaving no trace of emotion. She was nothing but a piece of cargo to them. But then one of the slavers hesitated. He was tall, his body draped in a cloak of silver armor that reflected the harsh lights of the ship. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft but filled with an undeniable edge of fear. "We shouldn't have taken her," he muttered, mostly to himself. A second figure, shorter, but just as imposing, barked a command. "Shut it. We take what we're paid to take, no questions." But the doubt was there, spreading through the air like an infection. And the girl could feel it, the sense that they had made a mistake. The kind of mistake that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "Don't know why they're so keen on her," the taller slaver continued, his voice tinged with unease. "She's just a girl. But her last name, if it's true." The second slaver's voice cut through the tension. "Don't talk about it. Just follow the orders. We take her, sell her, and forget this whole thing." But the mention of her last name lingered in the air, heavier than the ship's metallic walls. The girl's pulse quickened as she caught the word. Last name? She knew the power that a name could hold, especially one like hers. It was more than just an identity. It was a legacy, one that could turn the tide of galactic wars. And the moment the slavers learned that name, they would realize they had made a grave mistake. But by then, it would be too late. The name shattered the silence like a detonator going off. As the girl was shoved into the ship's holding cell, The last thing she heard was the murmured conversation between two of the slavers. It was meant to be a whisper, something unimportant perhaps, but to her, it sounded like the entire galaxy held its breath. Her last name. The first slaver's voice was barely a rasp. "If it's true, we've made a terrible mistake." "Don't talk about it," the second one growled. "Just keep her locked up until we figure out what to do. She's not worth the risk." They were right. She wasn't supposed to be worth the risk. To the slavers, she was a simple human, another product to be sold for profit. But her name, that was something different. That was why they had come for her. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving her alone in a dimly lit, metallic room. Her hands were still bound by cold, unfamiliar restraints, and her heart hammered as she tried to wrap her mind around the situation. The ship's eerie hum vibrated in the walls, a constant reminder that she was far from Earth. The sense of isolation hit her like a wave, suffocating in its intensity. Her mind drifted back to the moment of her abduction, the flash of light, the crushing grip that dragged her from the only home she'd ever known. But that wasn't what lingered. It was the name, her last name. The slavers didn't know it, but she did. And what they didn't realize was that just mentioning it could mean the difference between their survival and their annihilation. She was the descendant of warriors, of military legends who had written the very history of human resilience. The name they had uttered, the one that sent waves of fear through their voices, belonged to a bloodline that had once brought entire star systems to their knees. Her parents had been generals, diplomats, tacticians, figures feared by the alien empires that ruled the galaxy. No one had dared cross them. No one had dared threaten their family. Until now. And the slavers? They had no idea who they were dealing with. The thought of her parents brought a flood of emotions, fear, anger, confusion, but most of all, determination. She wouldn't just sit here, locked away like a prisoner. There was too much at stake. She had inherited not only their blood, but their will to survive. They hadn't raised her to be a victim. They had raised her to be a warrior, just like them. The restraints on her wrists were tight, but she wasn't weak. With a practiced motion, she slipped her fingers beneath the cold metal, pulling at the binds with determination. It wasn't the first time she'd been in a situation like this. Not by far. Her parents had trained her, taught her how to survive in hostile situations, how to think on her feet, how to make the most out of the worst odds. They had prepared her for moments just like this one. The slavers, with their fancy technology and brutal tactics, weren't the true danger. The real threat was what she carried in her blood, and what she would soon show them. A few minutes later, the restraints fell to the floor with a soft metallic clink. Her heart raced, adrenaline surging through her veins as she rose to her feet. The small cell offered little in terms of space, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was free, asterisk for now star. She moved quickly, her movements fluid and precise. The ship's layout was unknown to her, but she wasn't going to sit around waiting for the slavers to make their next move. They had underestimated her, and that would be their downfall. As she crept toward the door, she heard footsteps echoing outside the cell. The slavers were getting closer, but she wasn't about to let them catch her. Her hand found the cold metal of the door's control panel. Without a second thought, she pressed her palm against it, her fingers moving with practiced precision. She wasn't just a human girl anymore. She was the granddaughter of legends, the last of a bloodline that had shaped the course of history. And the slavers had just made the mistake of assuming she was weak. The door slid open silently. She didn't hesitate. Stepping out into the narrow corridor, she kept to the shadows, blending into the darkness like a shadow herself. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. She had no idea where they were taking her, or what they planned to do once they arrived at their destination. But she knew one thing for sure: they would regret ever laying hands on her. And soon, they would learn the true meaning of her last name. She hadn't planned on escaping so soon, but now there was no turning back. The corridors of the ship were colder than she expected. The low hum of its engines vibrated through her bones, a constant reminder that she was far from home. The walls, smooth and metallic, reflected the pale light from overhead, casting long, eerie shadows that made it feel like the ship itself was alive. It was only a matter of time before someone found her. But she couldn't afford to think like that. She had to keep moving. Her thoughts flickered back to the name that had terrified the slavers and sent them scrambling. It wasn't just her identity, it was her legacy. The bloodline she carried was one steeped in history, both glorious and tragic. And it was why the slavers had made such a dangerous mistake. Her parents hadn't just been powerful, they had been legendary, heroes of humanity, known across the galaxy for their military brilliance and political savvy. Her father had been a general, leading the charge in a series of battles that saved countless worlds from alien invaders. Her mother had been a diplomat, skilled in negotiations that ended wars and brokered peace across the stars. Together, they had built a reputation that no one dared challenge. And now, their daughter was here, alone. But she wasn't helpless. Far from it. She had grown up with their teachings, learning the art of combat, strategy, and survival. Her parents had made sure she understood that no matter how dark the world got, they would never allow her to become a victim. That lesson had been drilled into her since she could walk. As she moved through the corridors, her mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't yet fully understood. She could hear the slavers' footsteps getting closer. Soon, they would be in the vicinity. But there was a deeper sense of urgency gnawing at her. Why had they come for her? They had no reason to be interested in a regular human girl. She was nothing more than a pawn in their eyes. But the truth, the real truth, was far darker than they could have anticipated. Her parents' names were known across the galaxy, but there was more, much more. They had once been part of a covert operation that had destabilized the Galactic Order, an operation that involved more than just military might. It involved something far more dangerous, something the slavers weren't ready to face. The girl had no direct memory of it. She had been too young when it all happened, but she had pieced together the stories over the years. Her parents had uncovered something on a distant, forgotten world, an artifact of unimaginable power, one that had been buried for millennia. It was this artifact that had forced the galactic powers to take notice of them. And now, the girl was the only one left who could unlock its secrets. The slavers didn't know it, but they had just taken the key to a power far greater than anything they could ever hope to control. Her heart pounded as she rounded a corner, hearing the slavers' voices growing louder. She needed to act fast. There was no time to dwell on the past, no time to feel sorry for herself. She had to get out of here, and she had to do it before the slavers realized just how big of a mistake they had made. The name, their fear of her last name, wasn't just about her parents' legacy. It was about what they had left behind, what they had hidden. And now, the girl was the one who had to finish what they had started. With a final, steadying breath, she pressed her back against the cold wall and prepared to make her next move. The slavers were almost upon her, but she was ready. She wasn't just a helpless girl anymore. She was a product of a legacy that would change the course of galactic history. And the slavers? They had no idea what they had truly awakened. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a threat. The moment the girl slipped into the ventilation shaft, her mind raced. The slavers were searching the ship, hunting her like a wild animal. But they hadn't realized something crucial. They had underestimated her, not just because of her name, but because of what they couldn't possibly know. She had grown up learning to read situations, to study her enemies and her surroundings. This ship wasn't just a prison, it was an opportunity. The ventilation system was narrow, cramped, but it gave her the perfect vantage point to move unseen. As she crawled silently, the buzz of conversation below her reached her ears. The slavers were already planning their next move. They said she was valuable. One of the voices grumbled. But why? She's just a human girl. Another voice, rougher and more authoritative, responded. Don't ask questions. We've got orders to bring her in alive. I don't care if she's a child or a warrior. She's worth more than any of us. The girl clenched her teeth. They had no idea. None of them understood the significance of her bloodline, or why her parents had been targeted. If only they knew what her family had kept secret for years. It wasn't just that her parents had been legendary figures. They had been the keepers of knowledge, protectors of something that the galaxy's greatest empires had longed to control. Her parents had been part of a covert operation, years before the girl was even born, to secure and protect a relic, a weapon so powerful that entire fleets had fallen in pursuit of it. She was the key to it all. Her parents had hidden it well, ensuring that only a select few knew of its existence. But now the girl understood. They had been trying to protect me all along. A low hiss sounded from the vents, drawing her attention back to the present. She had to focus. She had to keep moving. The slavers were too close now. She slipped into the corridor, her senses alert as she moved quietly through the hall. She had no plan yet, only instinct and the knowledge that she could not afford to be caught again. Every step was calculated. Every breath was measured. Just ahead, a door opened. The girl froze, her back pressed to the wall. Two slavers stepped out, their eyes scanning the dark hallway. She held her breath, her body perfectly still, as the men passed without noticing her. The relief was brief. As the men moved farther down the corridor, she caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. A control room, hidden behind a thick metal door. The slavers were operating the ship's systems from there. If she could get to it, she might be able to override the ship's lock system, buy herself a little more time. But the risk was massive. She would need to act fast. As she crept forward, the sound of footsteps grew louder. They were coming for her again. She didn't have much time. She darted forward, slipping into the control room with a swift, practiced movement. Inside, the slavers were busy talking, oblivious to her presence. She needed the controls, just a few minutes, enough to disable the internal security systems. She had memorized the schematics of this type of ship. It was a standard model used by many mercenary groups. She was almost there when one of the slavers turned, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto her. The girl didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she reached for the control panel, slamming her palm down on the console. Sparks flew as the systems shut down, the lights flickering as the ship's internal security went into a brief lockdown. "What the hell?" one of the slavers shouted. "How did she?" Before he could finish, the girl was on him. She didn't give him the chance to react, twisting his arm and sending him sprawling to the floor with a practiced move. The other slaver lunged, but she was faster, knocking him back with a swift kick that sent him crashing into the wall. Her breath was steady now, focused. The ship was hers for the moment. But it wasn't enough. She needed to know more. She needed to understand why they had come for her, why they were willing to risk so much to capture a human girl. She needed to find out what they knew about her parents, and the artifact they had hidden. One thing was clear. The slavers were only the beginning. There were much bigger players involved now, and they were watching. And soon, they'd learn just how wrong they were to think they could control a human. They thought she was a prize. They were wrong. The girl's heart hammered as she darted through the ship's lower corridors, the flashing lights of the control room long behind her. She had successfully shut down the ship's security systems, temporarily at least, but there was no time to savor the victory. Every corner she rounded, every door she slipped through, brought her closer to something darker than she could have imagined. Her parents had prepared her for combat. They had taught her how to survive. But what they had failed to prepare her for was the scope of the threat now closing in on her. She had barely made it out of the ship's main hold when she felt it, a shift in the air, a silent tension that crawled beneath her skin. Something was wrong. The ship was on high alert, but the slavers weren't searching for her. No, they were running. And that wasn't something they did unless they were terrified. Her fingers brushed against the walls as she moved, feeling the slight vibrations beneath her touch. The ship was changing course, heading toward an unknown destination. But it wasn't just the ship's movements that felt different. It was the underlying pulse of the ship's systems. Something was being activated, something far beyond her understanding. Then, a voice broke the silence, low and dangerous, coming from the comm system. Asterisk, we've got her, but she's not the target. Not yet. Asterisk. The girl froze. The voice was familiar, distant, distorted, but she recognized it. It belonged to the captain of the slaver ship. Her stomach twisted as she realized the truth. This was more than a kidnapping. It was an elaborate trap. The slavers weren't just after her. They were after something else, something tied directly to her parents' past. Something so dangerous it could turn the entire galaxy upside down. She was the bait. Her mind raced as she forced herself to calm down. She had to think. She needed to understand what they were after, and why they were willing to risk everything to capture her. The girl moved faster now, her instincts kicking in. She knew she was running out of time. The ship was already being pulled toward its new destination. But where? And who were the people they were working for? There was no answer, not yet, but she could feel the eyes of unseen predators watching her every move. She'd made it this far on sheer willpower, but that wouldn't be enough to survive what was coming. The answer came just moments later, when the ship's sudden jolt sent her crashing to the floor. She gasped for air as the ship entered hyperspace, the world around her warping and twisting. She hadn't anticipated this, hadn't known the slavers were capable of such a quick jump. They were on their way to a hidden location, a place no one could track. And then, as if the universe had decided it was time for her to understand, the voice crackled back through the comm. Asterisk, we've got the artifact, and soon we'll have the girl. No one can stop us. Asterisk. The girl's blood ran cold. The artifact. The one her parents had hidden away all those years ago. The one that had been the cause of so much bloodshed. The one that now linked her to this deadly game. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't just a prisoner on this ship anymore. She was a key to something far bigger, far darker than she had ever imagined. The slavers' plan was clear now. They had underestimated her, thought she was just a pawn. But they hadn't accounted for her parents' legacy, nor had they realized what she was capable of. The girl knew she had to act fast. She could no longer rely on stealth alone. The slavers had already shifted the odds in their favor, and they were getting closer to their goal. But she wasn't about to let them win. She couldn't fight them all, not yet, but she could outsmart them. The ship's controls were hers for the taking, and with her knowledge of its systems, she could disable the engines, send them careening into a dead zone. A temporary escape, but it would buy her time. Time she desperately needed. But as she approached the control room once again, her instincts screamed. Someone was waiting for her. She wasn't alone. The slavers had brought in reinforcements, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to finish what they had started. The girl's breath caught in her throat. She was no longer the hunted. She was the hunter, and the game was about to change. She could feel the weight of destiny bearing down on her. This was it. The ship's darkened corridors echoed with the steady pulse of machinery, a constant reminder that she was deep in enemy territory. The girl's mind raced, every plan, every escape route she'd thought of, all flashing through her in rapid succession. But nothing mattered now. Not when she stood on the precipice of a battle that would either end her story or rewrite the future of the galaxy. The slavers had underestimated her at every turn. Now they were about to pay the price. The plan had been simple: disable the ship by time and escape, but things had escalated far too quickly. She wasn't just dealing with a few rogue slavers anymore. She was facing a full-scale operation, one that reached far deeper than she had first realized. And now, the ship was heading toward its final destination, a black market hub where weapons, information, and priceless artifacts changed hands under the cover of darkness. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on: her. The girl's footsteps were silent as she moved toward the heart of the ship, where the control room awaited. She had only one shot at this, one chance to turn the tables. She didn't hesitate. As she reached the door, she heard the voices of the slavers coming from within. They were too busy celebrating their supposed victory to notice her approach. The girl smirked, slipping behind the door and using her parents' old tricks to silently disable the locking mechanism. In seconds, she was inside. And then she froze. The captain of the slaver ship stood before her, as if expecting her. He was tall, imposing, his eyes gleaming with something far darker than fear. He had known this confrontation was coming, and he had prepared. But what he didn't know was that he had already lost. "Did you think I wouldn't come for you?" she asked, her voice low but cold. The captain's lips curled into a thin smile. "You're just a child. What do you think you can do? You're already in my hands." She stepped forward, the weight of her parents' legacy pressing down on her. "You've got it all wrong. I'm not the prize. You are." The captain's eyes flickered with confusion before recognition set in. "So it's true. You carry the legacy of the destroyers. But that won't save you." "No," she said, "but it'll save everyone else." Without another word, she lunged faster than he could react. In one smooth motion, she slammed him against the wall, her hand gripping his throat, her eyes burning with the fury of 1,000 generations. The captain struggled beneath her, but it was too late. She had him, and she wasn't letting go. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a sudden jolt, the ship's alarms blared to life, warning of a breach in its systems. The girl knew what this meant. Her actions had triggered the countdown. The ship was about to enter self-destruct mode. She had done it. She had won. The captain gasped, the fear finally breaking through his smug demeanor. "You don't understand. You can't stop it. You can't." "I already have," she whispered. With one swift motion, she snapped the captain's neck, his body going limp in her grip. As he collapsed, she let out a breath of relief. But there was no time for celebration. The countdown was nearing its end. She had only minutes to get out. The girl bolted toward the ship's escape pods, her heart pounding with urgency. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. The only thing that mattered now was getting away before the explosion tore everything apart. She raced through the halls, ducking into the pod bay just as the ship's walls began to shake. She barely managed to strap herself into one of the pods before the ship groaned, its internal systems failing as it entered its final moments. As the pod blasted into space, the girl watched through the small viewport as the slaver ship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, disintegrating into the cold vacuum of space. The shockwave hit moments later, shaking her escape pod, but she remained calm, breathing steadily. The fight was over, for now. But as the girl drifted away from the wreckage, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The slavers had been only one piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that had only just begun to unfold. And she would be there every step of the way,